All right, welcome into Carp's Corner. Pretty excited about this edition right here of what's going to be happening. Huge news coming down in college football this weekend. And it only used to be, in the NFL where there was these massive coaching moves and it seemed like a million of them happened every year. Well, now that's happening in college football. Teams, USC, Louisiana State or LSU, Florida, all these teams were making moves to fire coaches during the season. And in doing so, they're trying to grease the runways to make sure they had their next coach lined up to come in and take over. What has forced this? NIL, transfer portal, early signing day. Nobody wants to be left out in the cold when it comes to being able to bring in recruits. And so you want to try to get that coach in place as soon as possible. So that's what a lot of these schools did, whether Ed Orgeron was coaching the remaining games or not. LSU has been on the hunt. They have been looking for quite some time. Why do you think guys like Mel Tucker and James Franklin got these massive deals? It wasn't because their schools wanted to just pay them more out of the goodness of their hearts. It's because they needed to pay them to make sure that they wouldn't be leaving for the likes of an LSU or a USC. And so that is where college football has gone now. It's not the fact that you want to pay to take care of your guys. It's you pay them to prevent them from looking elsewhere. And that's kind of what we've seen. And so as you mentioned, some of these jobs that come open, you look at it and you're sitting there talking to your friends, water cooler talk, LSU, USC, Florida, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. I couldn't tell you the last time that there were 5 jobs that you could say you legitimately couldn't write the history of college football without. With the last 3 coaches at LSU winning national championships, Notre Dame and their long storied tradition, USC, the men of Troy, Heisman trophies, national championships, with what they've been able to do, Oklahoma and all the history there, and then Florida as well. I mean, these are 5, you could argue, of the top 10 jobs in college football, and all of them have been open. And they've been poaching from each other, which is something that we have never really seen in college football before. And this is why I think some of these fan bases are so upset. Some of these universities are so frustrated right now. And maybe some of them saw it coming. Maybe Notre Dame saw Brian Kelly maybe looking with a wondering eye. I always thought that he's someone that would go to the NFL. Obviously thought he had capped out at Notre Dame. We'll get into all that. But when you are a fan of a program that you believe to be a destination job, and a coach leaves that program not to go to the NFL, which I think Oklahoma fans, Lincoln Riley's been tied to the Dallas Cowboys last year. There's all these rumors about him going to the NFL. Like, okay, that may hurt a little bit. You may get upset and, okay, we got to find our next coach. But the reality is, like, they're taking that move to go to a different level. If you're moving within college in the NCAA and you think that your program is one of the elite ones, a lot of times you ask yourself, like, where would the coach go? Where would they want to be? Unless there's some strong allure because they're an alumnus or whatever it might be, from one of these other programs. The famous example, is Dabo Swinney, played at Alabama. He's coaching at Clemson. Should that job come open, the allure of home is very strong. And I get that. And I would never, being a guy who went to college 45 minutes from where they grew up, I completely understand. Very few jobs I would ever want to get in to coach in college football. Number one, depending upon the head coach, but 2, its location. And if it was in Columbus, Ohio, and if it was Ohio State for me, well, that's something that I'd have to heavily consider and probably look in on it. But I'm not trying to go coach all over the place. And that's how I look with some of these coaches. If there's a tie there, there's a reason for them to go back, then I think people understand a little more. I think fans are having a real hard time right now grasping, in schools and even players for that matter, of, hey, we came to this school. It was elite. You sold us on how elite it was. And now you're leaving this elite program to go to another elite program. And that's where that disconnect is beginning to happen. And I think, this week has been exhausting for some college football fans. They've been sitting here trying to figure out what's going on. This is something that they've never experienced before because we haven't even played the conference championship games. Forget about bowl games. Like, the season technically is still going on. We do not know who the champions of the conferences are. That is still hanging out in the air, let alone the final 4 teams that could be making the playoff. And the irony is that a couple of those teams could be having new coaches. There could be switcheroos in there. And I know that there's no loyalty among thieves. And since we're talking about these college football coaches, and the honor has always been in the dollar, very rarely are they turning down more money to be able to stay somewhere for a little bit less. You do see it, and it does happen. And I'll never begrudge anyone of this. It's a free market capitalistic society. If you can get paid more for your skills and where somewhere else, then you know what? You go take it, you go do it, and don't think twice about it. You don't have to apologize for anybody. Now, some of the things you say leading into it, some of the things you say afterwards, how you potentially handle your exit, those are all things that could come up for criticize, but I'll never criticize anyone for taking more cash. And so we'll break down, some of these deals and look at them. LSU, they hired Brian Kelly. Why did Brian Kelly want to leave Notre Dame? I think Brian had realized the ceiling of Notre Dame football, and he had gotten them there. They'd gotten in the playoffs. They'd been close-ish, but they'd always been like that elite playmaker or two away. They'd never really had that elite guy, mostly in the defensive secondary. They've had Harrison Smith back there, but outside of that, they haven't had any first or second round corners, let alone multiple ones at one time, to be able to go against the likes of the Oklahomas, the Ohio States, the Bamas, the Georgias, the LSUs, who have elite skill position players on the other side. They've had good D linemen, great tight ends, great offensive linemen, pretty good running backs. They've had some good receivers, as you've seen, with Claypool tearing up with the Steelers. I mean, they've had guys who are pretty good players at all those other positions. I think Brian Kelly looked at it, and Notre Dame's up their facilities. They've done a good job, probably loosening requirements a little bit to get some guys in, but you're recruiting in South Bend. It's tough with the talent base. And maybe Notre Dame said, you know what? We don't want to make any more exceptions. Our academics are the academics. This is what it's going to be. And I think Notre Dame's in a good spot right now. They're not elite. They could get in the college football playoff. I think everybody knows what that game would look like. They're good. They're really good. But when you start talking about the elite 4 or 5, they're like just kind of knocking at the door right there. And maybe if they put it all together in a year, and if they would have had a better team, this year could have been the year they won it, because there wasn't, in my opinion, Georgia's really good, but I don't see any quote elite teams with elite offenses and elite defenses. That hasn't really been the case this year in college football. So maybe if Notre Dame would have timed it up right and this would have been their year, it could have been it. But unfortunately, that really wasn't the case for him. So I think Brian Kelly has seen his ceiling, and maybe the fact that, hey, Notre Dame's committed a lot to this, but we're never going to be the SEC. We're never going to go all in on this. So if you want to win a national championship and you think that, we're not going to be able to have what it takes, maybe those conversations have occurred. Maybe Brian Kelly had pushed so much, and he has gotten so much done at Notre Dame, so much done there from where it looked like when I was coming out of school to where it is now. He has moved that thing mountains, and they've done a fantastic job with it. Maybe he realizes this is it. I'm 60 years old. NFL's kind of come and gone. And maybe if I want to win a championship, I'll go gas up for 5 to 7 years at LSU, see if that works. Does the fit work for LSU? I don't know. Brian Kelly doesn't really seem like a guy that could exist in the South and go down there and have a lot of success. I don't know. I mean, he's about quite opposite of Ed Orgeron, if you really look at it. I mean, how the personality wise, how they go about things, very, very different. He's not this incredible offensive genius. He's an offensive innovator, but he does a really good job, to my mind, running programs. They're paying him a boatload down there. I believe, his salary is getting close to, $11 million his last couple of years. I believe he's the highest paid public university coach now, at least as far as records are going with that. And he said it all with his statement when he came out. He said, I want to be on Broadway, the Broadway stage. There's no doubt about that. LSU is there. Their last 3 coaches have all won national championships. I don't believe there's another program that's ever done that. Ohio State has a chance to do that right now with Ryan Day, should he get there. But if you think about it, Nick Saban, was able to do it. The Mad Hatter was able to do it. Ed Orgeron, who even wasn't probably the greatest coach, but put together a remarkable season, he was able to do that. That is what Brian Kelly will have to live up to. There's some unbelievable bonuses that he has in there. It's a $500,000 bowl bonus. LSU has made a bowl game for the last 20 years. And then he gets raises. These aren't even bonuses. They're raises that'll be stepped in every year. And the more you do it, the more they'll grow. But $250,000 raise that can be accumulated each year that he wins the SEC championship, and then a $500,000 raise, you win a national championship. So Brian Kelly, heck, by the end of this, if he has any type of success, could be making $13-14 million a year by the end of this deal. And so Notre Dame fans probably a little bit upset. who could fill in for there, but we'll get to that a little bit. But LSU having to move on Brian Kelly because this guy, Lincoln Riley, who was at Oklahoma, took the USC job, was apparently flirting there. They thought they might have him wrapped up. He chooses to go to USC, so that Brian Kelly thing comes together really, really quickly. And, with this as well, people are banging on Brian Kelly, how he left. He did come back. He did meet with his team. I don't know what you want these coaches to do. Everybody does this. He's not going to stay if they make the playoff. I don't think they have a viable shot at really winning it all anyway. Maybe they could win their first game, depending on who the matchup is, but he did come back. He did try to face the music with his team. It's just the system that's set up in college football is so ridiculous. But I don't think this is something that he'd been out there lobbying and looking for these jobs for quite a while, because I had heard that LSU job was belonging to Lincoln Riley, who took the USC job. So Lincoln Riley there, reportedly 8 years, $110 million. Southern Cal private school, so wouldn't fall into that same public school purview that Brian Kelly did at LSU, but getting $100 million, basically getting $1 million bonus for his houses, limitless use of the jet. They're buying him a $6 million home in the Los Angeles area. Good for Lincoln Riley. I think this is something that they've kind of been looking at him for a while. And they wanted to get him. He does a great job recruiting in Southern California. And frankly, I think Lincoln Riley didn't want to go to the SEC. And that's kind of been talked about last episode. I think this is something that, he was kind of fearful of, didn't want to head over there. A lot of uncertainty. Would they be able to compete? Everyone thought it was going to be great going to the SEC. Fortunately, it's not. He's somebody, though, from everyone I've talked to, I think has been getting a little weird the last couple of weeks. And they had a viable shot at potentially making the college football playoff as well. Should they have won Bedlam and then won and beat Oak State back-to-back weeks, they could have potentially gotten in. But Lincoln Riley, eyes on the horizon, going out to the West Coast, massive deal again. The jet usage is ridiculous. Good for him for getting all that built in there and worked in there. But from what I had heard inside the Oklahoma program, they were working on stuff for him there, and he had kind of led them on to believe that he was going to stay. Then he ultimately goes to USC. So I think everybody there at Oklahoma is upset. Plus, they've seen massive decommitments, something that you haven't seen at Notre Dame, by the way. Florida getting it finalized with Billy Napier coming in from Louisiana. He's done a good job. He's going to have his work cut out for him trying to salvage that recruiting class and get everything going, because you're competing against Georgia, who looking pretty darn good right now, and ultimately Tennessee in the East, who's on the come up, and then also UK, who just has got Mark Stoops apparently signed to an extension. So the East is looking a lot better. Billy Napier, I think, is a good coach, has some ties there before, so we'll see his level of success, in the SEC, but a former Saban guy, and what he's going to be able to do there. So a couple of the big time jobs that are still open now: Oklahoma and Notre Dame. Where do they go? Oklahoma, I know Matt Campbell's on that list. People are saying Brent Venables is at the top of it. The coordinator for Clemson, ties to Oklahoma with Bob Stoops prior. I think that would be a natural fit coming back. Have to build out that offensive staff. But I know a lot of former players are stumping hard for him. Luke Fickell, you put potentially in that mix, although the Notre Dame job opening up kind of might muddy that. I mentioned Matt Campbell. A lot of people have thrown Mark Stoops into that conversation, brother of Bob Stoops, who, by the way, is going to be coaching them in the bowl game, which I think is terrific. Good for him, pulling the Barry Alvarez and coming out of retirement. This might honestly be something that we see happen more and more as these college coaches leave before bowl games. If you have a guy who's an old retired coach who hasn't been that far removed from the game and can really just come in and administrate things, and especially who has ties to university, makes a lot of sense. So Bob Stoops will be coaching it. Thought his brother Mark might be in the running for this, but apparently UK, they're working on a new deal right there for him. I think he's done a heck of a job, at Kentucky. I believe they could get to 10 wins with a bowl game win. So that would be a big thing for Kentucky. They know their expectations there. They've invested heavily into him, but I don't think anybody at UK is viewing Mark Stoops as a failure if he doesn't beat Georgia, Tennessee, Florida each and every year. So he's got different expectations, which are probably a lot nicer for him. He doesn't necessarily have to be all the way at the top, all the way at the pinnacle all the time. Realistic expectations. Just don't be the embarrassment. Let's make sure we can beat Vanderbilt, be competitive. Every 2, 3, 4 years, maybe we can win 8 to 10 games. let's just keep our floor at like 6 and we'll all be good. So that's Mark Stoops, apparently kind of out of the running. Dave Aranda, another potential possibility. He was in the running for that LSU job. Looks like he's getting something inked up with Baylor. And then Cliff Kingsbury, someone whose name you've seen thrown around, obviously was there at Texas Tech, gets fired, gets the Arizona job. Cardinals are playing really well right now. I don't know why he'd want to leave Scottsdale for Oklahoma, but depends on how much money they're willing to throw out. Like I said, there's no loyalty among thieves and these coaches. They're going to get the highest dollar from somewhere else. Maybe he would go from the NFL back to college. A lot of coaches like to get to the NFL because they don't want to recruit. I don't know if that's Cliff Kingsbury's bag or not, but he's got a really good setup with Kyler Murray, a good young quarterback. And while the Arizona Cardinals might not be the flagship team, I think he enjoys living in Scottsdale. They've got a really good squad. They're well positioned in the West. They've got the Rams with Stafford, that are pretty good, but it looks like Seattle's taking a step back. San Francisco's struggling. So I think he's got a pretty good setup. So I would have to say Brent Venables favored in the clubhouse, seconded by Matt Campbell. If that's a job that he wants, I think that he would be a really good hire at Oklahoma, and not sure if he, is willing to take it, if that's something that he wants, but that could be potentially there for him. And, Luke Fickell, but I think talking about Luke Fickell, he would be more appropriate for this next job, Notre Dame. And so they've talked, apparently the coordinators, Tommy Rees, Marcus Freeman, the players at Notre Dame apparently love Marcus Freeman. He's young, 35, going to be 36 years old. Not a ton of coaching experience, never been a head coach before. That would be really hard to do at a school like Notre Dame, especially when Marcus has only been there for 1 year. He was a coordinator at Cincinnati before that, which is terrific. Fantastic. Mark's done a good job. And full disclosure, Marcus Freeman, former teammate of mine, played with him for a couple years at Ohio State. I think he does a heck of a job, relates really well to players, really good recruiter. And I think he's got the background of the X's and O's enough down now that he would be a really strong defensive asset there. So the question is then who would you bring in, to help fill out his staff? That's the one thing you worry about at Notre Dame. First-time head coach, maybe he could keep a lot of the staff in place. Maybe a lot of those guys don't want to go to LSU with Brian Kelly. And there's some Notre Dame guys like Tommy Rees, who's the OC, who apparently they've talked to as well. And so he could be another guy that might stay. And so how do you build out that staff? Or potentially you go with Luke Fickell and maybe he keeps those guys on staff, or at least would keep Marcus. I think Luke, that's one of the two jobs, Ohio State and Penn State, that he would really take, or Ohio State and Notre Dame, that he would really take leaving Cincinnati. Penn State may have been a third, Oklahoma potentially a fourth, but I think you want to stay in that Midwestern footprint. Notre Dame, Luke was Catholic growing up. It checks a lot of the boxes. I think that could be a job that he would want. But here's the interesting piece. I don't know if Luke would be willing to leave Cincinnati should they make the playoffs prior to their playoff game. And, knowing Luke, his loyalty and commitment to the program, him being like a man of his word, I don't think that he would be able to look at those players and say, hey, I've sold them on this dream, this reality. Notre Dame, if you want me and you're not willing to wait, then maybe you should go with someone else. I'll take the job. I'll still recruit for you. I'll do everything, but I want to finish with my guys. And I could see Luke Fickell saying that. That may cost him an opportunity at this job. If he does take it, does he keep Marcus? I know there's a strong push at Ohio State where people may want him coming to Columbus or even Cincinnati. Would then they do the switcheroo and want to bring Marcus back as their head coach, with Fick leaving to go potentially take that head coaching job. So there's a lot of things that are swirling around, a lot of moving pieces with those 5 big jobs and everything that happened. Lincoln Riley, leaving. I think he's kind of had one foot out the door for a couple of weeks. Brian Kelly, everyone wants to kill him. It comes down late at night through their team app. What is the guy supposed to do? He wants to let them know before they find out through the media he's doing the best job. He's going to fly back and try to meet with them. I'm not going to sit here and defend Brian Kelly or any of these coaches, but the players understand how it goes down. They get it. That's why the transfer portal is great. Your coach is leaving. Maybe you love him so much you want to go with him, and you'll hop in that transfer portal. I think you're going to see some of that with Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley. A lot of his recruits, especially the LA guys, they're peeling off, potentially now commit to USC. But this is the first time now, and with a big coaching carousel of movement, that you could see some of these players hopping on that train and moving with the coaches, and they're not penalized and they don't have to sit out, which I think is something that cannot be underrated when we start talking about this, how important that could potentially be. So very unique times here. I think this is the first of what's going to continue to be becoming a crazier and crazier college football coaches hiring cycle. It's going to be more and more NFL-ish as these dollars continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we're seeing now, these 10-year deals, over $10 million a year for some of these coaches, private jet uses, houses, all this stuff makes a lot of sense. Virginia Tech also bringing in their coach, finding their guy, Brent Pry, DC of Penn State. He's been there for about the last 5 years as their DC. Done a really good job. Anybody who's watched Penn State football and they've watched the defensive side, they've never really had an issue with that. Routinely finished near the top in scoring defense, total defense, usually have a lot of sacks near the top of their run defense. Like, they've done a good job for the most part under the Brent Pry era. And so Penn State will be looking to obviously fill that void as well, but he did a really good job there. And I think that's a good hire for Vatek. They say he had Hokie in his blood. He used to be a GA there many years back under Frank Beamer. So they're being able to keep that continuity. You see teams go away from it a little bit, schools, but then they ultimately want to circle back to guys who they feel like ultimately know their program, that are invested in it, that have a feeling for it. Whether that's Notre Dame, Luke Fickell's never been there, but he's a Catholic guy. Marcus Freeman coaching at Cincinnati, or bring him back to Ohio State. Wanted to get that, former player aspect of it, so you can just understand. You feel like you'll be able to sell your program a little bit more if you have that close emotional tie. Diving in some of these games, 3 big games, in my opinion, when you look at college football this weekend, championship Saturday, Baylor at Oak State minus 5.5. The Big 12 needs a little bit of help. They need to make sure that Georgia beats Bama. If that happens, I think Baylor can get in, or Oak State can get in this game. Not sure about Baylor. I think Notre Dame will probably end up sliding in 4th unless Baylor just absolutely destroyed Oak State, which I wouldn't see happening. But Dave Aranda looking for, Big 12 title for him. Mike Gundy looking for one for him. I think that would be a nice little cherry on the Sunday for Oak State fans, as they've had to watch, Texas and Oklahoma potentially, be leaving here within a year or two. And so that would be a nice little thing for either one of those coaches, but especially Mike Gundy, who's been there so long with the Cowboys. Bama and Georgia minus 6.5. I'd probably lay those points. I think Georgia's running game too strong defensively. I don't know how they're going to move the football on Bama. Auburn did a tremendous job against them. They put together the 97-yard drive, or 3-yard drive, whatever it was, to tie the game up. But I don't want to have to rely on that. I don't think you'll have the time to throw it against Georgia. Their front is too good. No Jameson Williams first half targeting, I believe, in the second half of that game against Auburn. So he's going to be out for at least the first half. Best offensive weapon for Alabama. So that's going to be a little bit rough. So Bryce Young going to have to do a lot of himself. He's going to have to be mobile in the pocket, get the ball out quick, not take negative yardage plays against a Georgia front that's probably going to bottle up the Bama rushing attack and push a lot of it back on the shoulder of Bryce Young. So we'll see how well he's going to be able to play. The third big game, Michigan, Iowa. Iowa is an 11-point dog in this. I think it's a fairly good matchup, though, for Iowa. If you look at how Michigan wants to play, run the football, they'll throw some play action shots, play pretty physical defense. They're coming off a huge emotional win against Ohio State. Michigan is the better team. I would probably take the points. This looks like a little bit more of a slugfest to me. Maybe I'm wrong, and Michigan's, caught lightning in a bottle, and they'll be able to rush it for 300 yards the next handful of games, run to a national championship. Who knows? But I think Iowa does a good job of stopping the run. They can't score a ton of points, but that's not normally something that Michigan does anyway. So whoever plays the cleanest game, limiting turnovers, not putting the ball on the ground, not throwing interceptions, and rushes the football better. I think Michigan will do a better job of that. I think they win, but I think that game will be a little bit tighter than what everybody believes. And then as far as the playoff rankings, to me, it looks pretty good. Georgia, Michigan, Bama, Cincy, Oak State. I can't argue with any of that. Curious to see if Notre Dame could potentially slide in there. Bama gets beat pretty good, and then the Big 12 game just looks ugly, or Baylor wins. Does Notre Dame get in there? Who the heck is even coaching them? They're going without an interim coach. And so, Marcus and Tommy might have to, juggle that thing back and forward. OSU sitting there at 7, potentially could get in with just crazy things happening. I think the ESPN predictors give them 6% or whatever it is to get in playoff predictor, but I don't see that happening. Really, it's going to be a battle among those top 6 remaining teams. And most likely, if Bama loses, I think Oak State will get in. And I would love to see a matchup, and hopefully this will happen, and we can talk about it next week, a matchup between Cincinnati and Michigan in the college football playoffs, sitting there in a 2-3 matchup. Cincinnati, tough physical team, got some good corners, veteran quarterback, and Luke Fickell going against Jim Harbaugh. So while it's not Ohio State, Michigan in the playoff, it's an Ohio State guy and an Ohio team. And I think that's a game that could be pretty darn close and pretty darn attractive. So I'm hoping the chalk prevails this weekend. And in doing so, we're going to see some of those classic matchups that we hope to see in the college football playoff. It's going to be on New Year's Eve. And so I know some people don't like it. I'm not a huge fan of that. I usually like the more traditional New Year's Day, and it's hurt ratings in the past, but we'll kind of see how that goes. College football, man, it's a game for the rich now. The coaches are the superstars. We'll continue to dive into this as the NFL and college season rolls along. Thanks for listening. Next time, talk to you soon on Carp's Corner.